Utility District number 60. Welcome to all. Going to begin with roll call to order. Director Betty Doherty.
Here.
Director Donna McAleer.
Here.
Director Bob Lux is here. Directors Dale Walker and Mike Wise were unfortunately unable to attend due to out-of-town travel, but we do have a quorum and we do have an agenda. So we can begin with an invocation and our pledges of allegiance. Heavenly Father, we come to you today as an assembled body. We humbly request that you bless our meeting, our community, and our nation. Help us to work diligently, always for the common good and in the best interest of those we have been elected to represent. Guide us to be insightful and prudent in our intentions, visions, plans, deliberations, decisions, and their fulfillment. Work through us to provide a spirit of welcome to all in attendance, to engage in respectful and thoughtful dialogue and discussion with understanding, wisdom, and humility. Amen. If you wish, prior to the pledges of allegiance, please take an additional moment of silent prayer or additional reflection in the manner of your preference. Thank you. Pledge to the United States of America. Pledge to the flag of the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pledge to the Texas flag. On the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Thank you very much. Okay. We have a guest, but does not care to address the board. Is there anyone else who's here from the public? Okay. Consider an act, agenda item number 4, consider an act on requests for adjustment or relief from the specific charges imposed by the district. Mike?
Nothing this month.
Nothing this month. Thank you. Thank you, Betty. And Betty, yeah. Jeannie, sorry, pardon me. Consent agenda, pages 1 through 13 on our meeting packet. Any questions or comments? I'll make a motion to approve. Second. We have a motion and a second. Further discussion on this matter of approval of the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Okay. Agenda item number 9, review the district's draft fiscal year 2023-24 operating budget and recommended water rate structure. Separate document, which was provided by Maureen.
Several. You'll have budget, draft budget memo, which looks like this.
Yeah.
That's when it does.
But what goes along with that is the budget itself in spreadsheet form.
Some of this stuff.
And then you're gonna have one that looks like this that has the retail water rates. So the proposed budget for 60 will take into consideration your tax rates, which you'll hear about here in a minute. We look at, we actually did for the first time ever in WWA or Joint Powers, we did a water rate study. Your retail water rates have not changed since I think 2014, I believe. And it's been a while since, and I've never had a rate study like we've done this go round. We hired a consultant to do that. She is here today. Nelisa Hedden is here in the audience to answer any questions or share with you what went into the rate study. I will tell you that just to kind of highlight the overall projected revenue in the budget, 7,500,000 roughly. Projected expenses, 7,332,000, resulting in a net surplus gain this year, at least forecasted at the moment, of 171,000 or 72,000 roughly. We looked at expenses in terms of your repair and maintenance of water, sewer, and drainage facilities, identified any capital projects that may be coming up on the drainage side, put all those in the budget. The overall admin fee is actually reducing from 718 to 7. So those are kind of the highlights of how we got here. If you're interested, I'd like to have Lisa talk to you a little bit about what went into the rate study. It was from what we can see, it's well over 600-page document that went into the kind of the spreadsheet and guts of it. And then we are about to post here shortly the 90-page executive summary of that.
Thank you for bringing that up. I was about to ask if we could get some insights as to how this all got put together. And here you are. Thank you.
My name is Melissa Hedden, and my background is I work for water utilities all over the state doing cost of service and rate design studies. So I'm basically the bad guy everybody brings in to raise everybody's water rate. So I'm very popular. That being said, to give you a quick overview of how we go about developing a cost of service and rate design study, we actually look at it backwards than we typically do a budget. Usually what we do in annual budgeting is we look at our revenues and then we figure out what we can afford and go into our expenses. Here we go backwards. We start off with our expenditures. We use your current year expenses as a baseline, and then we make some adjustments off of that to look at kind of normal year expenditures. We back out of those expenditures things like interest expense, interest income, penalties. And then for mud districts, we also back out the proportionate share of your tax revenues that offset water and sewer. The reason why we say offset water and sewer is because we also have this district, we've got some storm drainage expenditures as well. So we leave that in the tax rate to cover that. That gives us what we call our revenue requirements. Our revenue requirements are the total revenues we need to get out of our water and sewer rate structure. We then go in and split that out between water and wastewater. Then we get into what we call a base extra capacity process that's described by the American Water Works Association. To understand base extra capacity, first we have to back up and understand how we build a water utility. We build a water utility with extra capacity to handle times of peak demand. By law, we have to build it with all this extra capacity so that in July we can all water our lawns and all those things. What we find, though, is that extra capacity has a lot of cost associated with it. By building everything bigger, it costs us more to operate. So what the base extra capacity methodology does is we go in on a line item by line item basis, and we look at your expenditures and we put them into 3 buckets. The first are called base cost of service, which is essentially if we got to live in a bubble world and we never had to worry about peaking, this is your theoretically cost of what it would have cost you to provide service. The second category is extra capacity cost of service, which is that cost of that incremental increase in cost associated with providing peaking capacity on the system. Third category are customer cost of service. This is the cost of metering, billing, all of those things, customer service representatives, etc. Once we've looked at each of those costs, we put them in those 3 categories. Then we start looking at our customers and understanding how they're using water. We typically place customers into customer classes, into like categories. In this instance, we looked at residential, commercial, and sprinkler accounts. Base cost of service are allocated to each individual customer class, looking at their average daily demands, because that's what base cost of service are recovering. So they get their pro rata share of the base cost of service. Then we look at their peaking demands. They then get the extra capacity cost of service based off of their peaking demands. Finally, we allocate customer costs based off of the number of customers. We do this because customers use water very differently. Using a commercial account versus a sprinkler account is an example. Very little deviation in the demand for commercial customers in general. They usually have very consistent flows. But commercial or sprinkler accounts, we always see these big peaks in the summer months when they're watering. So that's why we look at it that way, because customers are putting different demands in your system. From there, we design our rates, and you're been provided the proposed rates for the FY 2024. The rate design takes into consideration all of those cost allocations we just walked through, our revenue requirement. And then we also had to tweak a little bit to try to achieve the goal of the Woodlands Water to keep as many of the districts as possible on the same rate structure. So there's a few little tweaks in there to get us to that similar goal. We did have a couple districts that their rates were just significantly different than everyone else, so we kept them the same. That said, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that was a lot of information all at once.
I wish I knew enough to answer the question.
Well, if you think of a question, let your staff know. I'm happy to answer anything.
It's fascinating.
Maureen and Pete, the 171,800 surplus that's forecast, does this come in the rate as well?
Good question. So we look at your expenditures, but one of the forecasts there we're trying to accommodate, and I apologize, I missed this, is reserve funds. We looked at each district's reserve fund balance, and if you needed additional reserve funds to hit your targets, that was added in. And so that excess is by design, is to help you to build your reserves back up to at least 9 months reserve balance.
And I would say a bigger mover and shaker in that is the tax rate recommendations as well. That's going to have a bigger delta swing depending on if you make changes to the recommendation or not. So it could be a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 swing depending on the tax rate.
I actually did have a question. The capacity, you have to have the overage capacity for the peak times. Is there a law ruling that we have to follow about what that increased capacity is? Or do we base it on the norms of the rest of the Texas or something?
On design, all municipalities are required to follow certain minimums. You have to provide a certain minimum amount of water per resident, which you're well above your average. And so then you start to look at what are the averages and needs of the community itself. Because, one district might be 1,000 homes, but it was a tract builder that on smaller lots, not a lot of yards, et cetera, et cetera. You're very diverse. You've got some acreage type things. You've got a lot of bigger yards. And so your water use per person or per household is a little bit different. And so you have to take that into consideration when designing the plants. So your statutory requirement has already been met by meeting the minimums. It's just a matter of what next do you have to do to meet the needs of the actual users. And in this case, it's a little bit higher, but not much. I've seen other communities that are relatively similar per household.
There was a lot of discussion at the stakeholders meeting about capacity and about overage and so forth. And, a lot of going back and forth about why do we have to have, isn't that an overkill in extra capacity? And so that's really what brings my attention to it.
So that's on the sewer side.
That's on the sewer side, right?
So sewer is very interesting because over the last 2.5, 3 decades, with legislation that changes to low flow facilities, what the extra, I think SGA will confirm this as well. And what we've seen is over the last 2 decades, the amount of water that's coming to the plants from the same amount of users is less because the low flow fixtures or the low flow toilets or whatever. So it doesn't mean that the strength of the wastewater, the strength of the wastewater is higher. So it's, and I'm not going to get into the design parameters of waste strength, but the point being is flows have generally come down because of the fixtures in people's homes for the most part. People aren't using less water on purpose. They're flushing less water down the drains because they're getting less water from the faucet.
The other thing is, does this take into consideration, I've been working on the school bond stuff, and the population growth is, of course, the issue, and trying to get, how many schools do we have to have, and, seats, and you got more students, and we got seats. So is that, I mean, it's such an enormous growth thing that we got going on here, that I'm sure is somehow taken into consideration. 3,000 more students is what I know there'll be next year. So what does that mean family wise?
So we're just looking at what's consolidated in your boundary for your
Okay.
water. And so when we're looking at area growth for a school district, you've got all sorts of areas versus the mud district. So we're just looking at what this district says be, what your customers.
And so in terms of CISD, it would be a combination of muds then.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So they're looking at a much bigger picture than for each district in the Woodlands. We're just looking at your
Gotcha.
unique picture.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess just as a comment to go back to that 171,800, I certainly don't want this board to be accused of being a spendthrifts or over saving, but I think that we are facing some rather formidable expenses in the upcoming future, and we need to slowly and patiently move toward being able to have the reserves and the funds available to pay that. So it seems to me as though this is a very conservative and prudent approach to save a little bit. Used to be save for a rainy day. Well, now I guess we're saving for a dry day.
And to point out on the backside of the budget with the tan on it, you look at the very bottom. That's a road that we like to look at. And so those C59, 6, 5, 7, those numbers, that is the amount of months of coverage of your budget in terms of months. And so you're at 6, you fluctuate around 6. That's healthy and it's worked well over the years in a situation where we have, like you said, Bob, some increasing infrastructure renewal in the foreseeable future. And as Lisa mentioned a minute ago, we would like to start moving towards more of a 9 or greater than that. And so that would be our goal. I mean, at this point, this budget would put you in that kind of 6.5 category at the end of the year, which is, slowly going to work your way.
Can I repeat something back to you to see if I understand it? The number would be the cash that's available for, October would be, we have 5.9% available for,
Months, pardon me. Monthly expenditure.
Months of budget.
okay, so like if all goes to, if Maui happens here, we could cover things for the next 6.9 months is what that means.
I guess theoretically, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I thought.
2
Okay.
points, you could cover 2.9 billion.
Okay.
That's
I
right.
don't think that'll touch you.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I was looking at that right.
These are the kind of things that we have to consider, I believe, as a board. It's easy to cut rates, but it's difficult to maintain quality of service and continuity of service. Totally predictable, uninterrupted source of water and wastewater.
Where didn't I read in some handbook y'all gave me that we had to keep a year worth of operating expenses in our reserve?
That's a general
Yeah,
rule of
we
thumb.
would love
That's a
that.
rule of thumb.
We
Yeah,
would love
okay.
that.
Trying to move us to.
I thought that was the, gospel, but not.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, in my experience, in many muds in Texas, you would shoot for 12 months. But I would also say that a lot of those have their own mechanical infrastructure. You don't have any of that.
Mhm,
It's operated and maintained by, now you're still paying for it,
mhm.
the operation, but you don't have any of those bumps in the nights.
Yeah.
Replacing a pump or a
Mhm.
motor, a well goes down and things like that
Mhm,
as part of this.
mhm.
And so you've comfortably been in that 6 months range for a while. You haven't had a whole lot of heavy infrastructure problems for a while. But as we're hearing, the presentation about AC and sanitary sewer rehab and all that, we're heading that direction.
Yeah.
The infrastructure is aging and we're going to need to look smarter at how we're going to prepare ourselves financially for that. So you're at 6, you're at a good start. There's others that are, have a little bit of issue. But as long as we can kind of move that pointing up, I think we'll be in better shape.
This is just a review item. We don't have any action to take today. Will there be action next month?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We need to make sure that Directors Walker and Wise receive this information and any coaching that might be able to be provided.
And I encourage you, if you have any questions about the budget or the water rates or any of the above, give me a call. We'll be happy to walk you through any questions. There's a lot of work that was put into this over the last 60 days at least, if not longer. Well, Lisa's been working on the water rate study for several months now, so a lot of work's gone into it. And I'd love to hear your input if you have any.
Further discussion, Tom?
My question might be on another issue, but this document here from the memorandum says they're projecting a 41% increase on purchase services from WWA. I don't understand that.
Which stuff?
Page you on.
This one. From Maureen.
That page, well, perfect.
For page 3.
Okay. I see it, yeah. I got it right here. Here it is, Bob.
There, this part
Yeah.
right here.
Okay.
Just would like clarification on that and when we get to that.
Now we can get to it right now.
I think we're right there. So the discussion.
Midway through the tan part,
Mhm.
midway down,
Okay,
you're gonna see sewer repair.
I see some repair.
We'll follow it all the way over to the blue.
All the way over to the blue, yeah.
Look at the proposed budget 231.9 compared to what we are at in 2023. We have some significant sanitary sewer repairs that are gonna be coming,
I see.
and so we budgeted for that. So
Okay.
that's a big delta for that you did not pay in the past. And it's also something that will go away too, once it's done. But so it's not something that's gonna theoretically.
Just the one time.
Well, if you look back, 2021, it was almost double.
It's worse.
Yeah. Something super bad must have happened at that
I think
point
they
in
were
time.
digging up research for us then.
Flint Ridge?
Yeah.
Oh, that was that.
That deep sewer on Flint.
Right, right. That was a nightmare, wasn't it?
So one of the things that I'm interested in doing is looking at a more forecasted look at your expenses, particularly on the capital side, is to do maybe a 5 or 10-year CIP, capital improvement plan look to start building a roadmap for some of these. I mean, you've heard the 10-year plan from SDRA, and those are some large numbers, but you have your own infrastructure that's aging as well. That's just as old as that we need to look at. And so that will kind of shed a better light on how we project both tax rate and the water rates and water sewer rates in the future. If we have a better look at our expenses.
Mhm.
So I'd like to look at a projected CIP.
Yeah.
Very good. Further discussion? Betty?
No.
We can move on. Very good. And we're going to vote on this in September?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. Agenda item 10. receive the financial auditor's recommendations concerning the district's proposed 2023 tax rate determined by intended tax rate and authorize the required notice that the board will consider adoption of the new of a tax rate and the meaning of providing such notice. And that would be Mr. Cohen. Good afternoon, sir. Nice to see you.
You should have a letter like this in the packet. I'll have separate, if you'd like a
You see,
copy.
I don't think I have that one.
It's here.
Be-
Page 13
It's
in your packet.
Okay, if it's in my packet, that's good.
So just to remind you, as we start the process.
Yes. Yes, I got it.
Process. So all you're doing today is authorizing your publication of your total tax rate. And then next month you'll hold your public hearing. You'll adopt and levy the tax rate and break it out between maintenance and operations and debt service. So I'll run through the cover page really quickly. Your certified value came in just over 2.2 billion. You still have about 63.3 million of uncertified, so it's still under some sort of protest. So both of those combined, you have a total taxable value of 2.273 billion, which is about an 8.89% increase from last year's 2.08 billion. Last year, you needed 10 cents to pay your outstanding principal and interest. If you flip to the second page, you can see in that middle column, you actually need 9 cents based on that growth instead of 10. And then I'll point out all the way to the right, your debt service coverage. TCEQ requires that we maintain a minimum of 25% coverage. And that's when you submit a bond application to TCEQ. We don't foresee you ever doing that. However, we do recommend that you keep that minimum of 25% coverage. It accounts for the timing difference between your collection and taxes. But you can see beyond this year, those coverages go way up. So next year, we'll look at decreasing that debt service tax rate again, and then either shifting a portion over to your M&O to help add to your surplus or overall lower the tax rate. Some informative information at the bottom in the boxes. I apologize for it being so small. Your 22 M&O rate was 5.5 cents, which generated 1.13 million in revenue. This year's proposed is 5.6038. And so that is a specific number, but it'll generate 1.26 million. Parity rate, if you want to raise the same amount of revenue as last year, you would need just over 5 cents, 5.05 cents. And then the M&O tax rate to balance your budget was at 5.75 cents. But I believe that there were a few adjustments to the budget to show that $171,000 surplus. And then the value of a penny is 225,000 in your district. So that surplus turns into, if you wanted to think of it in pennies, would be 3/4 of a penny. Middle of the page, this is the taxing side of things for your residents. The average, everything is based on the average homestead. So last year's average homestead was $438,058, meaning your residents, based on that tax rate last year, paid $679. This year, if you take the recommendation moving forward, based on the $481,214 assessment this year for the homestead, that tax bill would be $703. So it would be effectively a $24 increase in overall tax bill. So think of it as $2 a month. And then all the way at the bottom, with respect to your overall tax rate, the proposed rate of 14.6038 cents is specific because that is the mandatory tax election rate. And so based on the development status of your district, because you are a developed district, you recall Senate Bill 2 says if you go above that amount, then you'd be subject to a rollback election and you would have to go to the voters. So that is why we're recommending the publication of the 14.6038, keeping in mind that whatever you publish next month, when you look to adopt that tax rate, you can always come down from that number. You can't go above it without republishing. So I'll pause there and I'm happy to answer any questions.
This is the first year that we have just been reclassified. Is that not correct? That just this year as a developed district?
Right.
Yeah, I thought so. And that changes the game.
Right.
Big
Yeah,
benefit.
as a developing district, if you go above 8% on your average tax bill, then your residents can petition for a rollback election. In this case, as a developed district, if you're above 3.5%, it's a automatic rollback election. To make things even more complicated, with respect to previous years, a 3-year look back, you have what's called unused increment that you can use that doesn't count against the 3.5%. And so what we're doing now is utilizing that unused increment to get you to the 14.6038.
And so last,
Easy for you to say, Mr. Cohen.
okay, and so last year it was 0.155.
Correct.
Okay, so you're going down.
Correct.
And so I tried to do the math and I'm probably wrong, but it looks like even though with an increase with home values, if you apply that tax rate, it looks like we go down about $10,560 for the whole year.
Right, and if you look, I guess I skipped that line in the middle box, the percent change in the tax bill is 3.5%. That's where the Senate Bill 2 stipulation comes into effect. And because you grew, the average homestead went up 9.85%, you're forced to lower your overall tax rate to get down to that.
So we're at least slightly better than break even. And so and maybe this is not the right question, but then they pass another tax reduction, property tax reduction. I don't know how that impacts the MUDs, but
Yeah.
for 2024.
Correct. So several components to the ultimate negotiated solution that the House and the Senate passed and the governor signed and it's going to election. Most of which don't impact flood finances. It's focused on school district taxes. The compression on the rate, what they call compression, basically lower the school district tax rate, which applies to all different types of property, not just homesteaded properties, but commercial properties, second homes, vacation homes, blah, blah, blah. That rate goes down and it's a shortfall in revenue as a result of the rate reduction funded by the state with some of the surplus. They also, which is what the lieutenant governor pushed strongly for, they also approved an increase in the homestead exemption that's applicable to school district taxes from 40,000 up to 100,000. Those are the two main items that were approved. And we talked about that a little bit in previous meetings. The additional, one of the additional things that was approved was a pilot program, basically for an additional cap on annual appraisal increases on non-homestead properties. Homesteaded properties already have the 10% cap. You are familiar with that. They can't go up on appraised values by more than 10% per year. But if it's commercial property, it's a rental property, second home, then you can go up as much as the market, supports. Well, as part of the pilot program, they're calling it a circuit breaker, which is a bit of a misnomer compared to other states, but put that aside. What they're calling a circuit breaker limits the appraisal increase on a year-to-year basis for non-homesteaded properties at 20%. But there's some caveats there. Caveat number one is that it's only for properties that are 5 million or less in value. So in the Woodlands, not a whole lot of commercial properties that are under 5 million. So don't know how much that's really going to move the needle for increases in appraised values for commercial properties. Real properties, there's a number of those in the Woodlands, and most of them, I venture to say, are under $5 million in value. So that will limit the increased appraised values, or what we call appraisal creep, for those types of properties. Now, with what's happening in the real estate market, I really foresee 25% annual increases are getting capped out at 20% over the next 3 years. Probably not. I think it's we're not going to see much impact. We'll see. But it is a pilot program. It's for 3 years. You're right. It starts in 24. It's for 25, 24, 25, and 26. And then the legislature will review it again, determine if they want to keep it, modify it, scrap it, what have you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Very good. Again, this is just to receive, and next month we'll take the vote. Thank you very much, Mr. Cohen. Appreciate it. Okay.
You can take a motion to authorize the publication of the notice in the Courier and in the Woodlands Villager at the rate that y'all choose. What's recommended is just the Courier.
We have to do it the Courier.
I'll make a motion to post the rate
I second.
and seconded by Director McAleer. Further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstain, motion passes. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that, Brian.
Sure.
To miss that deadline, wouldn't we? Wouldn't want to do that. Okay, agenda item 11, the Woodlands Monthly Operations Report. Nice to see, where's Mr. Meeks? Is he? Oh, there he is. I was waiting for you to walk in the door.
You know, if you want to take a pick from who you wanted to talk.
Uh-huh.
Well, we
Well, no,
definitely
not
prefer to
yet.
talk to Connie, but since we've got you, go for it.
I'm actually gonna pass it over to Dan, who has an introduction.
I was gonna ask, could Dan do it? That's what I was gonna ask.
So just want to take a quick minute to introduce a new face here with the River Authority here in the audience. So Nabil Khan in the back corner here. He has recently started with Estuary as a project manager. So he's going to be working alongside with next to him, Aaron Schindewolf, which I think a number of you know, helping deliver a large number of infrastructure projects here in the Woodlands for y'all and for Estuary.
Welcome.
Well,
Nice to meet you, sir. Okay, Mr. Meeks, back to you.
That's all we had on 11, unless you have any specific questions. Really nothing out of the ordinary, and the report everything's kind of going along with Lutheran GRP, pumping a lot of water. That's y'all can expect.
Is there any groundwater well information that's forthcoming? Are we seeing consistent well levels, or are those not reported yet?
Not yet. We're actually gonna be pulling those in September. Probably report to y'all in October. Wait till the peak season's done. That way we can see what the summer effect had on the aquifers.
Very good.
It also includes testing for those chemicals. I can't remember where I read that. Yes, that.
Forever
Yeah,
chemicals?
we are starting in September at the GRP and the Woodlands water and wastewater. Now, the MUDs have been collecting some PFAS through UCMR testing for about a year. Started in January of this year.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Nice to see you back. Hope you're feeling well. Certainly better, huh? Certainly better.
Certainly better, I wouldn't be.
Oh,
Okay, agenda item number 12, consider an act on additional research by San Jacinto River Authority for AC water lines. Connie and Dan, good afternoon.
Project this, I don't blind anybody before I pull this up, so. I'm gonna get share.
move out of the way.
Oh,
Here.
God.
Oh, move.
Better? Okay. So, good afternoon. Thanks for having us today. I'm Connie Curtis, the Director of Technical and Operational Services with the San Jacinto River Authority, and this is Dan Hildebrand, as you met him earlier. I'm the Tech Services Manager. I keep wanting to call him the Director, and that's a promotion or something. I'm not sure. No,
We'll
that's
get there.
right. We're here to talk about AC water lines. So there's been a lot of discussion since April. We've got a handful of topics that we're going to run through today. We're trying to move through this pretty quickly. So if you've got questions, please hold them till the end and we'll answer then. So we've got roughly a 20-minute presentation that we'll run through pretty quickly. Got 4 items here. Project plan background. So there's been some things that have happened since about 2017 that we just kind of want to make sure everybody's aware of. We want to go through condition-based asset management and kind of talk through different testings and things that we can do. Recommendations that Estuary has, and then the next steps that we're proposing. So you should have a handout that's 11 by 17 with you. That's a handout for this, as well as the presentation itself. With that, Dan's gonna take the first part.
And if you don't have a copy of the presentation, there is some more up
Oh,
here.
a copy of it, that's what I want.
Do you want one?
Right there, yeah.
Okay. I was shuffling things around, so.
Is that what, this is?
No.
You got that on?
That was in our
Thank
packet.
you.
And this is
Yeah.
the version that I just handed you is the version we presented last week to the trustees. We cut out a couple transition slides today, so if you see a slide missing, it's just to try to get through this in a shorter period of time. So like Connie mentioned, quick overview of the background, starting back in 2017, 2018 timeframe. This is when SDRA acknowledged that we had aging infrastructure coming up on 50 years here in the Woodlands. So we proactively started looking at the break history, the age of the pipes, where we've seen issues in the past, starting to look at a consequence of failure, a high level analysis on, where are some critical facilities to where if there was a break here, what would be the consequence of that? At that period of time, using the best information that we had, we internally estimated the replacement cost to be around $100 million for the AC pipelines, the asbestos cement pipelines. So in that 2018 10-year project plan that was presented to y'all, that's when you first started seeing these AC waterline replacement projects. So that was when we prioritized them and laid that out in that plan. So moving forward into 2019, 2020 timeframe, we had a number of conversations with the audit committee and the MUDs acknowledging that this is going to be a significant investment that's coming down the road. And how are we going to finance this? How are we going to fund it? During that timeframe, we internally, again, just estimated cost for replacement. And with some inflation at that period of time, it went up to around $109 million. So big changes in 2021, 2022. First one is we initiated that first highest priority project of the town center water line. We've talked about that some. That is currently at a 90% final design state. We also wanted kind of verification from a third-party consultant on how we've laid out the other water line packages and along with some updated cost estimating. So at that period of time, we brought on a consultant. They performed a 20-year CIP capital improvement plan for our entire Woodlands water system. That overall study was still fairly high level and was around $120,000. They used the best information they had at the time, estimated the cost of replacement of the AC water lines, which were, again, within that 10-year period, at $149 million. Coming out of that plan, this is the handout you have, 11 by 17 map. There was 11 proposed segments of water line to be replaced. Altogether, close to 48 miles of the AC pipeline. So that's just for your reference, and we'll come back to that a little bit later in the slide. This is essentially the same thing, except in a table format, laid out from highest priority to lowest is the way it was set up in that 10-year project plan. And just giving you some basic information here on number of breaks, age of the line, when it was installed, et cetera. So 2023, first quarter of this year, we have seen a lot of price escalation in just materials and construction costs. So we were concerned again about the cost estimate for the AC water lines. So we engaged another third-party consultant. It's the same consultant that's working on the final design of the town center water line, who we felt were most qualified to have the best information. They were also doing other similar projects in the region to have that cost data from contractors, vendors, et cetera. They went in, revised our cost estimates for each one of those 11 segments, and that's where the $200 million came from. That $200 million was presented to you in April in our 10-year project plan. And again, in July of this year, we hit the 90% design milestone for the town center water line. So today we want to explain a little bit more about a condition-based asset management discussion. One Specifically for the asbestos cement water pipe is really where the priority's at. But essentially, this same approach could be utilized for multiple different pipe materials, whether it's PVC, ductile iron, et cetera. So there's been a lot of discussion on this at the trustees meetings, the audit meeting, committee meeting, the individual MUD meetings. So since April of this year, we have reviewed a number of engineering articles, some that we have come upon ourselves, others that have been presented to us. We've discussed a conditions-based assessment approach with multiple national experts that have done this around the country. Some of those authored some of those engineering articles, others have authored some of the AWWA manuals for condition-based assessments. We have talked to vendors on destructive and non-destructive testing approaches and technologies. And we have also communicated with other municipal entities in the area on what do they do for their capital programs on replacing water lines specifically. So a couple, for example, is City of Conroe, City of Baytown, Sugar Land, Austin, that we, and others that we've communicated with to try to get a similar idea of what they're doing. So 4 main things, part of the condition-based asset management program that I want to lay out over the next couple slides: opportunistic sampling, both controlled and uncontrolled, destructive testing, non-destructive testing, and the engineering analysis piece. So opportunistic sampling, uncontrolled. So what that is essentially when pipes break. We have worked recently to update and revise our internal SDRA approach of when pipes break. What are we collecting for data? We now have a multiple page form that's filled out for every break with any sort of information data that's being collected up from down to the specifics of the pipe, the location, to what our observations were in terms of where that pipe broke, whether it was at a joint or straight section, at a valve, but also the external impacts to where, all right, how long were we out of water? Was there damage from the water line break to private property? What was the cost to repair it, the time, et cetera? So we're capturing all that in our asset management software. We're capturing it in our GIS, but we are looking to start sampling some of those pipes. So if we have a pipe break, we can actually physically take a piece of that AC pipe, send it off to a laboratory and run tests on it. And I'll get into a little bit more on what those tests are. So controlled sampling. So this is for essentially planned construction projects. One that has been talked about the most, town center water line. As we're going in, replacing that line, we can pull samples of the AC pipe out and send that off for testing to gain additional data. Another one that hasn't been talked about as much is the Harper's Landing waterline extension. So that is funded through the R&R program and is currently at 100% final design. It's a small segment that we're looking to add a waterline extension to connect kind of a loop. This is over east of 45, MUD 39, Trade Center Parkway, that area. But what that is tying into is an AC line, one of the 11 segments that's shown on that overall map and plan. So it is just an opportunity that we would have to take either a coupon or a piece of that AC pipe and have it tested. So we're constantly looking for ways to gather more data as we go through just kind of our routine waterline replacements. So destructive testing. The main thing here is we are going to have to shut down a section of line in order to maintain the level of service that we're required to do. We would have some sort of bypass, an above ground pipe bypassing flow to maintain that water service to customers. We would have a contractor excavate down, remove a segment of pipe approximately 10 to 13 feet. That would be essentially a joint to a joint. We'd be able to take that pipe out. We could bring in experts on the geotechnical side to study and take soil samples, look at the embedment, the construction around that original pipe, and then the testing. So there is at least one local certified lab to do AC pipe testing that I'm aware of, but that's essentially where you're sending a piece of that pipe off to do physical testing on it, whether it's chemical based, there's a few tests there, or physical tests of like crushing the pipe. Ultimately, you're leading up to results that are going to define wall thickness, strength, hardness, or any internal, external degradation that you're seeing on that pipe. Non-destructive testing, just because it's non-destructive doesn't mean we don't have to shut down a section of pipeline in order to conduct those tests. So again, more likely you're shutting down a segment of the pipeline and you're going to have to run a bypass to maintain service. The most, I guess, talked about technology on the non-destructive side is an acoustical test. So this is where you'll be connecting two sensors, approximately the maximum that goes about 700 feet apart. You might be able to connect them to some hydrants, but we don't have hydrants every 700 feet along estuaries lines. But you would have to dig down and actually tap into the pipe to allow for those sensors to communicate with one another. Sending that acoustical wave through the pipe, essentially they're measuring an average velocity that translates to an average stiffness and degradation in that pipe. There's pros and cons to destructive, there's pros and cons to non-destructive. On the non-destructive side, you're essentially getting an average over 700 feet to where if you have a small segment of that line that's in really poor condition and the rest is good, you could get some skewed results. On the destructive side, you're taking one very small sample at a very distinct location that may not be representative for the other 3 miles of that line. So again, pros and cons. Engineering analysis, regardless if you're doing non-destructive or destructive, there's upfront engineering analysis, and then there's the back end. So the upfront engineering analysis would be bringing on an expert, a consultant to define what that program would look like, how much testing do you do, and where. The back end is, all right, now that I got all this data, what do I do with it? So an approach that has been explained to us is the use of predictive modeling. You're going to be taking all those data results, and now it's not just an age or a number of breaks metric. You're going to have a number of different metrics to help define what the likelihood of failure is of that line breaking. Do you weight those factors differently? What are the trigger points for when you say, all right, this metric hits X, that means we need to replace it? That's something that we need to work through and have a professional help us with. But ultimately, you're leading up to a prioritized and possibly rescheduled project plan to lay out the replacement of the AC pipes. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Connie to talk a little bit more about some of the recommendations and how much proposed testing are we talking about?
All right, thanks, Dan. So how much is it going to cost? That's what we're about to get into. So we've got to come up with a budget number. So we've talked to all these experts and we've read all these articles and we're trying to come up with how do you corral this in? And so from a maximum kind of perspective of what can you do? So there's a rule of thumb that some of the consultants have let us know, maximum for the destructive testing. So digging down, taking that piece of pipe out, sending it out to a lab, 1 sample per mile. So if we're assuming that the town center line, which is already at 90% design, is taken out, that's roughly 3 miles of pipe. So there'd be 45 miles left. That's 45 total locations. So if all we were to do was only destructive testing, there'd be 45 locations. This is roughly what that could look like. So don't hold me to where the red dots are. This just sort of shows what 45 dots look like on that map that you have. If we look at the non-destructive testing, there's less of a rule of thumb, more of, let's call it judgment, engineering judgment on how much to do. So once again, town center not being included, 25 miles of the 45 miles would be roughly what we're kind of being told to do. So looking at our map again, there's some black squiggles on here, and those black squiggles are roughly 25 miles of pipeline. So that would be the acoustic testing that Dan was talking about, but taking lines out of service, once again, please don't hold me to where the black squiggles are. It's just for schematic purposes. Lastly, engineering analysis. Dan said it and said it well. We're gonna have to need it for whatever we do. So the cost of engineering is really based on how we put together non-destructive and destructive testing. So what is Estuary recommending? This has been the question that we've been getting for a while now. Engineering analysis is necessary. We need that front-end analysis to let us know exactly how much we need to do where, and the back end to help us process the data and come up with that end result. What we're budgeting right now to help us with this budget is half destructive and half non-destructive. So all those experts have lots of different opinions on what needs to happen. And so some of them would say that non-destructive needs to go first and then identify where maybe there's a problem and then go do destructive testing. Some would say, if you know where some problems are, go do destructive testing and then go back and do non-destructive later. So we need to kind of work through with who we select to help us with this to come up with what that is. But worst case scenario, half and half gets us a good budget number that we feel good about. That's honestly probably the worst case. Prioritized and scheduled project plan would be the result. This is what it could look like. So if you take the red dots and the black squiggles and you say some places there may be a red dot where there's no black line. Some places there may be a black line where there's no red dot. And then there's some places where you may have both depending on what we find in the system. So this is just once again a schematic purpose map of what could be happening as you're working through on your proposed study. At the end, this same chart that was from the 2021 study that we had, I want to make sure to reinforce here, this is never a stagnant document. So at the end of the day, we're always going to have more breaks that are coming through. So this column over here is constantly going to change. As we get more breaks, as we move forward, you may find that the risk of one of these that's later in the system may need to move up. That would happen regardless of whether we did any of this study or not. We would constantly be kind of looking at this and making sure that we've got these projects prioritized right. But the results of having more data that we've gone and done some deliberate testing for helps us to make sure that we've got this list correct. This list would then be updated with the study. So there's an asterisk up here, whether you noticed it or not. We want to just drive home this point one more time. We need consultant recommendations. So we're going to have an RFQ and some space and some time to do that, to get a consulting engineer on board. We need contractor to do excavation and temporary water. So that's not something that the consulting engineers do. And then we need to get a testing lab on board. So all those things are really important and stuff that we need time to do in order to get this started and to do it correctly. Now then, how much time is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? Worst case scenario, once again, looking maximum 4 years if we're estimating. So hypothetically, if you start in January 2024, it would complete in January 2028. So, you know, we can look at it and say the next projects that are up, we can prioritize the testings in some of those locations to make sure that we feel good about what they are. There's lots of ways we can go about the schedule, but for now, just for where we are right now, the estimated schedule would be about 4 years to have a completed study. The estimated cost would be $3.5 million. That includes the engineering analysis, the contractor to excavate the pits, geotech borings, destructive testing, non-destructive testing. So pretty much all included, best that we can estimate right now, that's $3.5 million. So the next steps that we here at SDRA have considered and what we're bringing to the MUDs right now is SDRA is committed to continuing our opportunistic testing. So Dan outlined that for the uncontrolled line breaks, we have a whole new, format and form that we're continuing to gather data. We've been doing the gathering of data for, since 2015 fairly effectively, but we're going to try to improve it even more. And then if we do have any other projects that are water lines that have to move up, we're going to continue to do that opportunistic testing. Second, discussing this condition-based assessment at the August MUD meeting. So here we are. Hope you are enjoying this. And then number 3, this is how we presented it to the trustees, but we do want to modify what this is based on some feedback from the trustees. So what we say here is at the September MUD meetings, we want the MUDs to consider and take action. But what we're actually going to change that to say is at the September MUD meetings, gather the questions and give them to SDRA for beforehand so that we can answer whatever questions you have so that you can then direct your trustee member to vote in October on a need for a $25 million bond. So what is part of that $25 million bond and the request from SDRA is construction of town center water line. So us moving forward with that, we've got the design basically completed. Let's move forward and complete the construction as well for that design to be completed in 2024 and then construction to start in 2025. And then we will plan to perform opportunistic testing during construction. So we will actually take pipe that's already in holes that is already going to be open as part of construction and gather data to figure out that just helps with our modeling moving forward. That's $15.5 million. Preliminary engineering for North Town Center, Grogan's Mill. So this is the southern extent of Town Center and continuing that project. And then Panther Creek is the next prioritized area. So that's $2 million a piece for each of those preliminary engineering designs. So essentially, we're running with D, and here's the condition-based assessment at 3.5 million. We're really asking to run 2 parallel tracks. We want to continue to gather data, but we also want to continue to move forward with our design and the construction of the plans that we have. And so that's really what a lot of cities and municipal entities do, is they'll continue to gather data, but they don't waste time. They continue to move forward. So that's really, as we're moving forward, what we're asking. The last piece there is E, is the cap I. That just makes sure that it adds up to 25. So we don't want to leave that out. So that's the last of our slides. I do have a question slide at the end, but I'm going to stay here at the next steps because this is really where most people's questions come in. Dan and I are happy to be here and answer any questions that y'all have today.
Thank you, Dan, Connie.
And I can, y'all have this in front of you, so I can do this. Y'all can.
Lots to ponder.
Is all of this standard operating procedure? You've always done this, or you're adding a lot to your procedures?
We're adding a lot.
Okay. And so the page that shows that in Grogan's Mill, there've been 8 breaks. Is that the way you've done it before? Just go, oh my God, they're having a lot, and you dig it up and replace it with none of the tests and safely.
We have never, and Chris, you can pipe in on this. Estuary has really never had water replacement before. We've had a lot of sewer, but the water has generally been in good enough shape that you didn't need to. We're getting to that point in the age of the system where you're beginning to need to consider these things.
Okay.
And so we really started to track the data better in 2015 when we started doing an enterprise asset management system. And by 2017, you could track it a lot better and see where we were. And so that was really where, with Dan's history, 2017 to 2018, we began to identify water line projects in that 2021 to 2025 window. And that's where we stand today. So it's not that we just went out to fix things. We would fix the leaks when they happen. And that's all we've really been doing up to this point.
Yes.
Just to confirm, on that same chart, the segment that's identified as Trade Center, that's the MUD 39 segment?
Correct.
Okay. That is a 2077 vintage, which is very close to the town center. This is a project that is moving forward regardless.
So that is a project on towards the end of the priority.
He's saying town center or trade center?
Trade Center.
Trade Center.
So trade center is much further out in our 10-year project plan.
Okay, I'm glad I clarified that because I thought you indicated, or at
So-
least I heard that.
So let me
Oh,
clarify.
mention Luke,
Yes,
but there was,
The
well,
Hartford
it
line.
attached to an AC line, did it not?
it's
Okay.
attaching to an AC pipe that is part of the larger trade center project that's further out down the road.
So there wouldn't be the opportunity to gain any destructive or non-destructive test from a sample because you won't be there until 2034.
So
You could take a,
slide 17, I think is where y'all are talking about, where it says the Harper's Landing water line extension. So that is a small loop.
Pages that, we got pages and not
They're-
slide numbers.
it's down on
We
the-
do have slide numbers. Never mind.
Okay. That is a small water loop that we're completing. And we're tying into an AC pipeline. And so we've identified that as an opportunistic sampling because we're tying into AC, and we'll take a coupon of that pipe that we're tying into. But right now, those are the only 2 projects that we're aware of for us to do what we would call controlled sampling.
Thank you for
Yes, sir.
getting me back on track there. I know there's been a lot of discussion at numerous MUD meetings and trustee meetings about data. We need data to make educated decisions, and it appears as though this is a plan to obtain data. And in the grand scheme of things, it's a lot of money, $3.5 million, but the risk reward somewhat justifies the expenditure to continue to be visionary, prudent, and plan for uninterrupted sources of water. Uh, I had a brief discussion with Mr. Cohn before the meeting about bonding and some of the costs that would be associated with that. And if you care to pick up and run with this, but he kind of told me that the magic number for rates is about $20 million. So that's where there's,
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Jump in.
You jump in.
If you were to go to open market to get the larger banks to come
Right.
look at the deals, and it's around $20 million, and the bigger banks will come in. And then I explained to him the difference between Texas Water Development Board rates versus open market rates. They're
Right.
pretty significant, being about 130 basis points for water and just over 150 for wastewater.
And right now, my understanding on the Water Development Board type Ds, they're only selling them like in November.
Right.
And so if we don't get to it by then we have to go open market.
Mhm.
So that's not to put any pressure or say anything else. That's just.
Well, no pressure. Thank you. That's a relief.
Sorry, that probably came across terrible. But that's just some data that we are also aware of when we've been
But-
talking about the waste.
Sounds like.
I think where I'm trying to understand all this is, I think that there's a lot of agreement, or at least off the record, conversational, anecdotal agreement that the town center pipeline is critical. It's the economic engine to the Woodlands. It's, we've got $106 billion worth of assets that's being served. And if we miss this window to at least go forward with town center, we could be facing, from a bond perspective, we could be facing a very uncertain future. You know, you predict the bond market. You know, that's what, yes, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So we just don't know. Hunch would tell you that rates are probably gonna, not be advantageous. I mean, you're gonna get about as good as you're gonna get. I don't think we want to miss that November.
Mm-mm.
So, the other thing that I want to put out there that I should have said was, on that next step slide where we had the 5 or 6 things that we were recommending or that we were asking for, how those come to you all for consideration in October for voting. There's some requests for them to be broken out, from an SRA perspective. Y'all can vote on them however you would like to. That's just the list of things that we've got right now as a request.
Well, as I stated, maybe again, you've just clarified that maybe that same $20 million isn't applicable to Texas Water Development Board. That's just the big banks.
Correct.
Okay, so if indeed, as we go forward, we would want to fund town center and sit back and wait on the funding for the additional testing program. But again, I mean, when you're looking at a completion of what, 8 years or 4 years?
4 years.
4 years,
We'll probably have some ideas before then, but
yeah.
how long
Hypothetical
it
start in
takes.
January 24,
Yeah.
complete in 28.
We hate to over.
How long do you want to wait? But by adding the addition, if we add the money onto the bond to cover this cost over and above the cost that is estimated for town center, does it make any difference? And do we have to use those funds?
You could repurpose them. I mean, you can repurpose them for a different project.
It's gonna depend on the bond. If you go specifically for like a water development board water bond, it's not like you can repurpose that to help with the sewer.
We're talking
side.
about open
But
market.
open market gives us some more flexibility in order to do that too.
I guess I'm trying to slowly, hopefully get to is if we approve the moving forward with the $25 million bond issue, we don't necessarily, we can simply fund the town center and then sit back, take a breath, and wait a little while.
And I think.
And we're not gonna violate any bond covenants or laws or anything like that.
Right, and I think what SGRA is trying to ultimately do is plan for the future construction by being able to get the studies done and the engineering side of things done in the, previous issuance, so that when they look to go to construction for the next issuance, that they're prepared and they have the necessary information. Otherwise, that deadline
Oh, yeah.
keeps getting pushed out. So from a timing perspective, they're trying to do their due diligence and time for when you have to sell future bonds, and just be prepared on the engineering side so that they can move forward with construction.
Would we qualify these projects for the Water Development Board bond funding?
Either, then,
It would probably have to fall under the development fund, the
Right.
D fund.
income.
I don't know what that is.
It's another fund that they.
Oh, it's a category.
Right.
Not DE dash
No.
fund.
Oh.
Oh,
Right.
D as in the letter. Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to our knowledge, they would. And so it really depends on the timing. Honestly, we kind of felt like we probably were gonna end up having to do open market, just from a timing perspective. But if we don't, then.
I think that's valuable information that Mr. Cohen can share with everyone about that. Would you please care to make that that brief calculation that you showed me?
Sure, yeah, I mean, and I would have to look, and the Texas Water Development Board posts weekly on their rates. So I'd have to look at the defund rates, but you're probably looking at about 100 basis points savings. Just.
To make that November issuance be
Well,
in that.
defund, fortunately, the defund, I think you can do at any point.
I think that
They
what I've
just
heard is they've
changed it.
recently changed that to where it's either once or maybe twice a year.
Yeah, they just changed it.
So there is some urgency. It's just money, right?
We can follow those. Any questions that y'all have moving forward, please send them to Eric and he'll be getting them to us. And so we can answer some of those questions and make sure that we're prepared for that for next month. We've already kind of got down what the impact of the bond would be for rates and things like that as well.
Okay, thank you. Didn't mean to get off track here. Further discussion on this, directors, McAleer?
Well, it sounds like it's gonna be 22.3 million bond or $25 million bond, if I'm doing the math right.
Well, or we roll it all into one bond issue and then
That's what.
then maybe step back and wait and not use it except for town center. But yet you've already got the money and it can be repurposed.
In a $25 million bond where it's all
Yes, ma'am.
rolled into that.
That's what I heard. Is that accurate or inaccurate?
So
That's an option.
It's an option.
Okay, doesn't it depend on where you get it from, open market, or whether you can repurpose it?
At 1.5%, I think it'd be prudent to try and do everything we could to get into
Mhm.
Texas Water Development Board. Thank you so much.
Y'all for your time.
Okay, I think you're still here, Dan, for the Spring Creek update. Detention study.
So I don't really have anything to update on Spring Creek this month. Other than just continuing to have discussions with the solar company and set up some meetings with elected officials to brief them on the projects. And then we're looking at a March, April timeframe next year for the next public meeting, which would be the third public meeting that we would be hosting. Unless you have any questions, really not a whole lot.
Thank you, Dan. Keep chipping away. Agenda item 15, receive the attorney's report.
No journal items under the attorney's report today. I do need to cover items 16 and 17.
Right, sir?
Go ahead and move to 16.
Please do.
All right, amendment of an amendment to the district's 12th amended restated district information. So a purpose of that is to update your notice to purchasers that's provided to folks when they buy property in the district. That notice to purchasers is attached as an exhibit to the district information form. So we talked about during the legislative session and in summary to that session, one of the bills that was passed modified the language in that notice to purchasers to make it a little easier to read for lay folks. The language in that notice is set out verbatim in the water code. So we worked with the legislature to get that language streamlined and a little more simplified. So I think the version of it is up on the, if you're looking for a copy of it, it's on
Yeah.
Google Drive.
Oh, yeah, ever-present Google Drive, yes.
Present Drive. So
Someday I'm gonna figure out how to get on there.
Yeah,
There's a lot of good stuff there, isn't
I think there is.
Wouldn't we be
That's what I'm
surprised,
told.
surprised?
I don't go on there very often myself. I'm just told when the stuff's put on there. So it lists what your tax rate is, how many bonds you have received authorization for from your voters, how many bonds have been issued by the district. There's also a little blurb in there that the district is in the city of Houston's ETJ, but we're also in the township and subject to the regional participation agreement that you could in the future result in the incorporation of the township. So just some basic information for folks when they buy property in the district to make them aware that they are buying property in the MUD, what the MUD's tax rate is and what its ability to issue bonds and control. So all MUDs have to have this notice to purchasers. The bill becomes effective next month. And so we're having this on all of our district agendas to get approved. We'll tell you, it will feel a little repetitive next month because since it does list your tax rate, we're going to have this on there again next month because we'll have to update it again to reflect the new tax rate. Ideally, we would have just pushed this to next month, but technically the change in the form is effective September 1st. So we wanted to make sure we had the new form in place before the effective date, even though we're going to have to bring the same item back to you next month just to tweak whatever the tax rate is.
So we need to authorize,
So do you need a motion on item 16? Yes.
I so move.
motion and a second. Further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you.
And 17, policy number DIR 20 regarding director's fees of office. So that document has been updated to reflect the change in the legislative session that was part of what we call the omnibus bill. Included a lot of cleanup for MUD districts. One of the things it updated was the director fees of office that have been the same for 20 plus years at a flat $150. It wasn't increased for cost of living or inflation. So the legislature has now tied director fees to what state legislators are paid, and that is set by the Texas Ethics Commission. So we have included that language from the statute or from the bill into your policy. So that way we don't have to come back to you every time the Ethics Commission updates legislator fees. Currently, the amount is $221 per day. So that'll be a slight increase from the $150. It is director fees for MUDs are still capped out at $7,200 per fiscal year. We don't have many districts that have directors that go past that, but in the event we do, then it's $221. Once you get that $7,200, you're capped out for the fiscal year. So that's the primary change on the policy. While we had the policy opened up, went ahead and added language. You'll see on the second page there regarding virtual attendance at conferences. Back when this policy was put together in the early 2000s, there was no such thing as virtual participation in conferences. Now, after COVID, it's a pretty common occurrence. So we wanted to add language to make it clear that directors with the approval of their respective boards can have directors attend conferences such as AWD or other trade-related organizations that you can attend those conferences virtually and receive credits.
And all of these become effective September 1?
Yes. Well, actually, the omnibus bill is already effective. So your current fees of office, I believe today are reflective of 221. So you'll approve this and then it's in the budget. It's 221. The notice to purchaser statute becomes effective September.
it's effective next month.
Effective already.
One part, the first part is the the purchaser part is effective. No,
So the item, you've already approved item 16 on notice to purchase. On this item here, under 17, it will be effective as this.
Effective now.
Yes, yes.
Just like the legislators vote on their own salary, we get to vote on ours.
So we have to vote on this now.
Yeah, it's already approved, it's effective, but our mud needs to accept it, is what I'm hearing. you
That's
say.
correct.
Mhm. And I'm so moved.
so, and, motion has been made by
Second.
Director Doherty, seconded by Director McAleer. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, receive the general manager's report. Agenda item 18.
All right, really don't have too much to, in addition to what we've talked about today. A lot of work's been done on the budget and the rates and things like that. So wanted to kick it over to John to have him go through the public outreach, summary.
Afternoon.
Geiger, good afternoon.
Hello, John.
So you have a separate communication report, apologize, it wasn't in the main packet. This should have it somewhere around you there. There we go. So we are near the end of our third quarter of our strategic plan. Water conservation is a focus there. We're going to be moving into the value and putting a highlight the next quarter on infrastructure and financial aspects of our water system. So watch for a little bit different messaging there. On the next page, some more encouraging statistics to present on the website visitation. So July was our second biggest month ever. You see on that chart there that all of our months of this year, all 7 full months, rank really high. That's encouraging. That's a nice barometer of how we're doing overall with our marketing. And then that bar chart on the right there shows that our average page views or way to mark visitation in our website is up 30% over last year and 38% over the previous 5-year average. So that's encouraging. The weekly emails continue to trend upward as well as far as open rate. More and more folks are engaging with that. We've been able to move that up 4 percentage points in the last 6 months or so. One thing that we're focusing on a little bit more is, responding to a lot of chatter, input questions, not surprisingly about water bills, right? We're all aware of the weather. The response to that is to try to keep our landscapes alive. More watering, higher water bills. So folks are paying attention to their water bills. And so they're asking more questions. And so not only we want to keep helping them conserve water and water effectively, that they are keeping their landscape healthy, but we want to help them do that in ways that is responsible, efficient, to keep those bills low. The number one tool for that is Water Smart. I know you're aware, but I'll just keep reminding you, if you got 15 seconds with somebody and they've got concerns about their water use, point them to Water Smart. And if they have any questions at all, we're happy to help them log into that. It's a pretty simple process, but they can just call us up and we'll get them all squared away in a matter of a minute. And we're happy to do that. And I did include a calendar there at the bottom of page 2. I'll be doing this monthly, just keep you updated on where we're going to be in person, what events we'll be at. So you know what we're up to, and then if you want to join us, please do. You're always encouraged, welcome to come to our booths and engage with residents that way. And you'll see that we are sponsoring a number of those events as well as attending. Some current marketing materials on the following page, again with the water conservation focus. We did get on Nextdoor as promised, so we've added another platform to our social media suite.
Did you get to do anything else now that you're on Nextdoor? Doesn't that consume all?
Oh, I'm not
My gosh.
going down the rabbit hole. Just for posting information.
Okay, I mean, everybody's got an opinion.
Staff for that.
Not good.
We're just trying to get out.
But we're not nice, that's true.
Uh, the SRA infrastructure, communications consultant, that process is moving along nicely. The SRA board is going to vote on that on the 24th to approve the recommendation, and hopefully we'll be working with that outfit in September. And then finally, we did a rebase of the back of the water bill. Just trying to make best use of that space to market our resources for customers, and also to make it as easy as possible for them to discern how their water bill is arrived at. So that new version will be coming out in a couple weeks.
Doing a great job, John. Thank you so much.
Yeah, the
Very, very
weekly
effective
stuff looks
messaging.
great, and my favorite thing is the drought tolerant plan. But that's all we need to be funding.
50% rebate.
Well, we gotta have them out there. I go to that thing all the time, and we stopped to, negotiate that, and nobody ever showed up at that booth. So I'll take action if I need to.
Thank you very much, John. Agenda item 19, receive the Woodlands Water Trustees Report. Comprehensive as to what occurred is included on 42, 43, and 44. And if you have any questions or require further information, myself or Mr. Peterson will be happy to assist, inform. Any questions, further discussion needed? Hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item 20. We're not going to close session. And discuss matters for placement on future agendas, other than those that have already been mentioned about votes that are required and on AC lines and so forth that have already been identified. Anything special? Special interest? Hearing none? During the meeting.